Are you just getting into photography and struggling with dark or grainy photos? The problem might be your ISO, and once you understand how it works, it's one of the easiest camera settings to master. In this video, we'll show you exactly when to raise or lower it to get clean, bright photos every time. And if you're new here and wondering why you should listen to us, hi, we're Trent and Jessie, a husband and wife wedding photography duo from Brisbane, Australia. We've been photographing weddings for 13 years and in that time have captured over 350 weddings. Now, in this YouTube series called Camera Basics, we're sharing everything you need to know about using your camera and the basics of photography, so you can get started capturing amazing photos.
Ready to finally understand your camera? Let's go. So what does ISO actually mean? Technically, it stands for International Standards Organization. Helpful, right? Not really. Here's the truth. You don't need to remember what it stands for. What matters is understanding what ISO does to your photos. ISO is one of the three main settings in the exposure triangle, along with aperture and shutter speed. Together, these three control your exposure or how bright or dark your image is.
At its core, ISO controls how sensitive your camera's sensor is to light. Think of it like the volume knob on a speaker. If the music you are playing is already loud enough, you don't need to turn up the volume much. This is like when there is a lot of light in a scene. You don't need to increase your ISO, which will make your camera more sensitive to light. You can simply use a low ISO. But in a room where the music is too soft and you can't hear it well enough, you turn up the volume to hear it better. It's similar to using a high ISO. This will make your camera more sensitive to light for scenes that are dark, like night scenes or a dimly lit room. But here's the catch. Just like turning a speaker up too loud can create distortion, raising ISO too high can introduce grain or noise into your photo. Noise looks like tiny dots or fuzziness in your image, especially in the darker areas. It lowers your image quality and makes your photos look less sharp. You can use noise or grain as a creative choice, but for the most part, you want to avoid this in your images.
So when should you use a low ISO and when should you raise it? Let's break it down. A low ISO, like 100 or 200, means the sensor is less sensitive to light. It's best to use this in bright conditions, like sunny outdoor scenes. You'll get a clean, crisp image with no noticeable noise. A high ISO, like 1600 or 3200 or higher, means the sensor is more sensitive to light. Use this in darker settings, like indoors or at night, when you need extra help brightening your photo. But remember, a high ISO means your camera is more sensitive to light, but there is more potential for grain.
ISO doesn't work alone. It teams up with shutter speed and aperture to determine your image brightness, or what we call exposure. Let's say you can't slow your shutter speed because you're photographing moving people, and you can't open your aperture any wider. What's left? That's where ISO comes in. Raising it gives you the brightness you need, especially in low light, without changing those other two settings. Think of ISO as your backup brightness tool. It's there when your aperture and shutter speed can't do the job alone.
Here we have a photo taken at ISO 100 and the other at 3200. Notice the difference? In the ISO 3200 image, you'll see some grain or noise, especially in the shadows and darker areas. This noise looks like coloured specks throughout the image and will generally appear red, green or blue. On the other hand, the image that was shot at ISO 100 appears crisp and doesn't have noticeable grain or noise.
Most DSLR and mirrorless cameras have a dedicated ISO button. On our camera, it's this button right here, or you can find ISO in the settings menu. Let's walk you through it. The image on the back of our camera appears too dark, and we want to brighten the image. Without changing the aperture or shutter, we will press the ISO button and use this dial to increase the ISO. Notice how the image is now brighter? So we know what ISO does, but what do these numbers mean?
ISO is represented by a series of numbers, and these settings usually look something like this. ISO 100, 200, 400, 800, 1600, 3200, and some newer cameras go all the way up to 25,600 or more. Each step up doubles the sensor's sensitivity to light. So if you go from 100 to 200, the image will be twice as bright, assuming your aperture and shutter speed stay the same. But again, more sensitivity means more noise. So the goal is always to use the lowest ISO you can get away with for clean results.
Now let's talk about auto ISO. It's a great tool for beginners, and it tells the camera to choose an ISO level for you depending on the lighting. But there's a catch. Your camera might play it too safe and increase the ISO way higher than needed, just to avoid underexposure. That can leave you with grainy images even when the lighting isn't that bad. If you use auto ISO, keep an eye on what the camera is choosing. Or better yet, learn to control it manually for better results.
Here's a quick recap to remember. Low ISO means your camera is less sensitive to light, and this produces a cleaner image. High ISO means your camera is more sensitive to light, but there is more potential for grain and noise. Try to stay at the lowest ISO whenever possible, and only increase ISO when the lighting demands it.
Let's look at some common scenarios and what ISO you might use. For a bright, sunny scene, you could use ISO 100. A golden hour portrait outdoors, you could use ISO 200 to 400. An indoor family photo session or dim interiors, you'd use ISO 800. If you're doing night photography or star photography, use ISO 1600 to 3200. Or if you're shooting a concert or low-lit event, choose ISO 3200 or above.
And just like that, we've got ISO covered. Now you know how to use it to brighten your photos, avoid noise, and feel more in control in any lighting condition.
That means you've now learned about aperture and ISO, which leaves us with the final part of the exposure triangle, shutter speed. This is how long your sensor is exposed to light. It not only affects exposure, but also controls how motion appears in your image. That's coming up in the next video.
If you haven't seen our previous video on aperture, be sure to watch that video next. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you in the next one.